Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Poison Pen. This is a bittersweet evening for us at the Poison Pen. We're absolutely delighted to have Boyd Morrison with the second of a two-book adventure for the Oregon and the corporation. And joining him is Don Bentley, author of Without Sanction, and with a new book coming in March. And he's also going to be writing the Jack Ryan franchise in the Clancy universe. But it's a sad night for us because this time last year, Boyd was here with Clive Cussler, and we had a wonderful time. And today, Boyd, I posted a picture of Clive. It's the last one that we took when he was signing copies of the book in the store. And my heart really clutched when I put it up. But as those of you watching know, we lost Clive in February, but Boyd, luckily, was able to design this two-book adventure with Clive, even though he's carried it on his own to completion. So to introduce Boyd to you, he's the author with Clive of several Oregon Files novels, Piranha, The Emperor's Revenge, Typhoon Fury, Shadow Tyrants, and the last one, Final Option. And he's the author of 6 other books. Now here's stuff I didn't know. I really like this. He's also an actor and an engineer with a doctorate in engineering from Virginia Tech, has worked on NASA's space station project and developed several patents. But here's the one I really love. In 2003, he fulfilled a lifelong dream by becoming a Jeopardy champion. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. What did you get from being a Jeopardy champion?
I won $11,000.
Whoa. Did that allow you to write a book and quit your
job?
Yeah,
let me retire. Yeah.
I love it. So, Boyd, it would be interesting to know. I know you and Don have loads of material, so Patrick and I are going to fade into the background here and let you talk. But I don't know if I've ever fully asked you, although I think I know the answer. How did you begin this collaboration with Clive? Do I get to hold up my hand and say guilty?
Yes, you are definitely responsible. It was back, I had written 6 books of my own, and Clive was looking for a new author to collaborate with on the Oregon series. And so I think what he does a lot of times, I think you can confirm this, is he comes over to you and says, what other authors are out there that might be a good fit? And I think one of several that you recommended, but I had done my first book tour at the Poison Pen, so I think you had read a couple of my books already, and so Clive read a couple of books. He read The Vault and Rogue Wave, and loved them. And so one day I was just sitting at home and I get a call from my agent, and she says, "Hey Boyd, what would you think about writing with Clive Cussler?" And I said, "Oh, the guy I've been reading for 30 years? Yeah, that would be great." And she said, "Okay, he's going to call you in 2 minutes." And I'm like, okay, I'll not try to freak out for the next 2 minutes. And sure enough, he calls me and he goes, "Hey, Boyd, read a couple of your books and really loved them, and loved the endings that you've come up with, and want to know if you want to write the Oregon Files series with me." I said, yes. And he said, "Okay, we'll fly you down here in a couple of weeks and get started." And that was literally the extent of the conversation. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in Clive's office brainstorming the ideas for Piranha.
Do you know, Clive, one of the things there were a lot of things I loved about Clive, but one of them was that everything he did was kind of a handshake deal. I think, if I have this right, I don't think he ever had a formal written contract with Peter, his agent.
Nope.
And with all of you authors, he was a real gentleman of the old school, and everybody could trust him. And it was interesting, over the 30 years we were together, he became more and more of an icon, but he never actually stopped being Clive.
He was super humble. He kept all of his awards on the wall in the bathroom of his office.
Yes, he did. He had a 2-story office. I love the ship models that were upstairs. Somewhere in our archives, Patrick, we actually have a a video that I did at Christmas time with Clive. I'm wearing my red dress and looking, like Santa Claus female. And we were in Clive's office and we panned the camera. I didn't, the cameraman did, panned the camera all the way around it. And it was just full of memorabilia. Well, you know how much time you spend it, and I know how much time I've spent in it, but many people never seen it. So there we are. So I was sort of inspired by Clive to use this ridiculous backdrop, but I mean, don't we all wish we were on a beach with palm trees and surf? But it really fits the start of Marauder. And at that point, I'm going to sort of hide myself on the screen here, guys, and let you, can I do that, Patrick? I can. And turn this over to you and Don, and we'll flash back in. Patrick is monitoring Facebook. For those of you who are watching this on Facebook, if you have questions, please go ahead and send them to Patrick, and he will monitor them and pop back in after a while and read off questions as he can. So with that, take it away, guys. Who's first?
Okay. Well, I'm gonna introduce Don, because Don and I have known each other for a number of years. I think since long before you got your first book deal, right? Absolutely. And Don has an amazing background. I mean, he is a badass guy. I mean, he flew Apache helicopters in the Army. Where did you serve, Don?
I served in Germany, South Korea, Afghanistan, and Texas.
Yeah, and you were awarded a Bronze Star and an Air Medal for Valor.
Yep.
And that's amazing in itself. But then what does he do for an encore? He joins the FBI and becomes a SWAT team member. And so he knows what he's writing about in his books, and his books really reflect that. I've read Without Sanction. It's a fantastic book. What he puts his main character Matt Drake through in that book. I mean, Job is like, that guy had it tough, man. And then I've already been enjoying his upcoming book, The Outside Man, and that book starts out like you're shot from a cannon. And so he's a great guy, he's a great writer, and so that's why I wanted to have him here for this chat today.
Well, thank you a lot for that, Boyd, and we're going to get into this more, but I really appreciate you having me here. And Boyd is one of those, I'm fortunate that I've gotten to know Boyd pretty well, as he said, and he's one of those authors that excels at his craft, number one, and number two, he's not afraid to put his arm around folks coming up through the ranks and kind of helping them understand what it really means to be a writer, what it means to be a writer from a business standpoint, from a personality standpoint, from how your life is going to change in good ways and bad ways. And so I really do appreciate that, Boyd, and thanks for having me. But I have to start off by saying, while my background is cool, you might just be the most interesting man in the world. So a scuba diver, an actor, a Jeopardy champion, a PhD in engineering, and you write action adventure books, which are obviously suitable for your background. And I know we've talked before a little bit about your path to publication. And to me, that's just as interesting as your varied background. And so Barbara stole my thunder a little bit about how you got to work with Clive, but could we set the stage and back up just before that and kind of talk how you came to publication? Because it's a very interesting path.
Well, it's you and I have talked about how resilience is really the key trait of somebody who can make it in this business. You and I are very similar in that way. I didn't get published until my third book. I think it was number 4 for you. And so, I think that's something for writers to remember, is that it doesn't necessarily happen on your first book. You have to keep going. You have to learn your craft. You have to just keep pounding away. This is not a business for the faint of heart. And so I had written 3 books. Going back a little bit, my wife and I kind of made an interesting deal. After I got my PhD, she decided and I had written my first book, but I hadn't found an agent. I hadn't gotten it published. And my wife decided she wanted to go to med school. And so we made a deal that I would work and put aside writing for 9 years while she did pre-med, med school, and residency. And then when she became a full-fledged doctor, I would be able to quit my job and become a full-time writer with the same goal of getting published in the same 9-year time frame.
Nice.
And it took me 5 years. So I banked 4 years to just lounge around and you know, just hang out if things fall apart. But I wrote 3 books, and I got an agent. And my 3rd book was called The Ark, and that was the one that we submitted to publishers. And we got a lot of what I call great rejections, where they loved it, but they couldn't figure out what to do with it. And so we seemed to exhaust all the publisher. I think 25 publishers rejected it. And so that was around the time when e-readers were coming around, and people were starting to self-publish. And I was one of the first to self-publish my 3 books.
Mm-hmm.
And they were starting to sell so well that they were outselling people, nice. You know, like Clancy, yep. Just because they were cheap and nobody had, you know, heard of me. And it was me and I think 4 other people who were doing it at the time. And so I started doing so well that my agent decided to go out to publishers again with that information, and I signed a deal for The Ark and its sequel, and then signed a deal for the other 2 books that I had self-published. And one of those was, I think, almost 20 years old, or 15 years old at that time. And I rewrote it to make it more contemporary. But you know, so if I hadn't stuck with it, none of those books might have ever been published. And then, you know, then I wrote the other 3 books, and that's when I heard from Clive.
And that's such a cool, you touched on resiliency. That's such a cool story, because what you did was to continue to plug away, to continue to put yourself out, even though you're getting beat down, even though you're getting rejections. And then you get, you know, it's the equivalent of being in the minor leagues, if you will, and you get the call from the major leagues where Clive Cussler says, hey, why don't you come write a book with me? So what is that like to go from writing by yourself, from everything is just in your head, to suddenly you're sitting in the crazy office of this legend that you have read his books for 30 years, and he says, so Boyd, what's your idea? how does that conversation go?
Well, I was super nervous. I think I called him Mr. Cussler until he just berated me not to call him that. Like, again, he's, you know, super humble guy, and yeah, just call me Clive. And, you know, I stayed at his house. He's got a beautiful casita in the back of his house. We actually stayed with him. We went out to dinner. He and his wife got to know my wife, and she came down, and it really became kind of, you know, we were like family. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's true for a lot of co-author relationships. Yep. But yeah, I was super nervous. We went out to lunch the first day I was down there, and he ordered me and him gin gimlet. And I am not a gin drinker, but I didn't, you know, this is my first day, my first lunch with him, and I was like, okay. And I drank the first sip, and I thought I'm gonna throw up in front of Clive Cussler. And so for the rest of the lunch, I just put it up to my mouth and pretended I was drinking, and then just put it back down. And then the next day when we went out to lunch, we went to a Mexican place, and before he could say anything, I said, I'll have a margarita. So that wouldn't happen again. Now, I got to know him so well that if he had done that again, I would, Clive, I'm not having a gin gimlet. I'm going to have something else. But thank you. But yeah, that's how nervous I was. I couldn't say no to him at all.
So 30 years from now, when you write your memoirs, it's going to be How I Almost Threw Up on Clive Cussler is going to be a separate chapter in there. And so you have the meeting with him. You know in your heart you're a good writer. You would have never got the call. you get the idea. He said, yep, we're going to do this. And then you go home and then you stare at your blank screen and you're like, holy crap, I have to write a novel with Clive Cussler. Like
Yeah.
how does that process, how did the co-writing process actually work with you and he?
Well, so what we would do is every time we start a book, I would fly down to his house and I'd stay there for a few days. And I would sit in his office with him and just brainstorm ideas. And a lot of our time was just spent looking like this. And he, you know, he has 4 other series going. So a lot of the problem is I don't know what Graham and Robin and Jack and all the other co-writers are doing. And so I'll say, well, what if in this book we decide to do like somebody's going to blow up the Panama Canal? And he'll go, oh no, we're doing that in the Dirt Pit book right now. So we need to do something else. So yeah, a lot of my ideas got shot down because either it had been done or it was being done in another book right now. And so we would basically come up with the major ideas for the book. What's the villain and what are they after? There's always a historical link in his book. So what is that and how can it be relevant to the story? What are the major locations in the story? You know, for the Oregon, we set it in a different part of the world every year. And so we decide where that's going to be. And then we talk through some of the major action set pieces maybe. And then that's basically it. And then I would go home and I would write 100 pages and send them to him. And he would revise it and send it back to me. And then we would just keep going like that until the book was done.
Wow.
So, but before we go any farther, you know, Barbara mentioned that you're writing for the Clancy estate now, and you're writing Jack Ryan Jr., right?
That's right. That's right.
So how did you get that call? I haven't heard that yet, so I want to hear that now.
Well, I appreciate that. So I have the pleasure of having Tom Colgan as my editor, who's a fantastic editor. And if you want to be a writer, or if you just enjoy those thrillers or something, I would encourage everybody to follow Tom on Twitter, because the guy on Twitter is exactly the guy he is in person. I was very, very nervous when I met him at first, because he'd worked with everybody, you know, from Janet Ivanovich to Mark Graney to Tom Clancy and stuff. Super down to earth guy. And so I turned in my first book with him without sanction. And then when we were having the editor call for The Outside Man, which was our second book, and as you know, but folks watching might not know. So once you turn in the book, your editor reads it, and then he or she sets up a call and you kind of talk about the book and what, you know, the editor liked or didn't like or wanted to do. And it was a great call. And at the very end of it, it was almost like a Columbo moment, right? So I'm about to hang up the phone and he says, well, by the way, I have this question for you. How about if you wrote the Jack Ryan, Tom Clancy series? And I, you know, in my head, I heard some words and I was like, did he just say Tom Clancy? Like, is that what just came out of his mouth? And so I said something to him that I can't even recall. You know, I may have just hung up on him after he said that. And so I went and talked to my wife and I'm like, I think he just, I'm not sure because I was a little excited, but I think he just said I could write the Tom Clancy series. And so that's one of Tom Colgan's things he's famous for, is going out and finding co-writers for series. So he, you know, he had Mark Graney originally doing both with Tom Clancy and then by himself, and then Mark Madden. And then he found, you know, Mark Cameron and Josh Hood now to do a different series, and then the Andrews and Wilson guy. So it was literally like that, where he, you know, the last 30 seconds of a call as we're hanging up, he said, hey, by the way, would you be interested in doing this? So it was a little different. I didn't get the call and get to ride around in the cool car like you did, but it was still a pretty fun moment. So you, as you're writing with Clive, who has, you know, one of the most famous novelists, you know, on the planet, you obviously, it's almost like you get to have a master's class with a master novelist as you're writing. And so what are some of the things that Clive kind of taught you in that process where you're doing, you know, writing jointly with him?
Well, Clive really knew his audience. He was all about having a really spare story, focusing on action and pacing. And you know, like I said, I've been reading his books for now for 35 years, or
Mhm.
40 years probably. And so I kind of internalized that from reading all of his books
Yeah.
over the decades. And so when I started working with him, it really wasn't hard to fit with his expectations. Now, that said, when we started working together, I really, he almost never added stuff to my books. He almost always deleted stuff. He'd say, the reader doesn't need to know that. That's just going to slow down the story. So he really taught me a lot about making the story as fast-paced as possible, while still having a good rhythm in the story, good breathing room and building tension, but not putting anything that didn't need to be in the book. And he and I had a similar outlook. He never really, he considered himself, and he told me this a number of times, he considered himself an entertainer. And so his books had to be entertaining.
Nice.
And they are. I mean, just look at all of his fans. And so I try to do that myself as well, of just saying, I don't want a reader to find any point in this book where they find it easy to put the book down and do something else.
Yep.
I want them to always, after they get to when they get to the end of every chapter, I want them to go, okay, well, just one more chapter, because I need to find out what happened there. And then they get to the end of the next chapter, and well, okay, I want it to be the Lay's potato chips of books, so
one more,
just one more, and then all of a sudden it's 3 a.m. and I'm getting an email from the person saying, you made me so tired for work the next day. Thanks a lot. And I say, well, you're welcome.
And I will say, from having read The Marauder, you definitely accomplished that goal. Like, you cannot put that book down. And so I'm ashamed to say now that was my entry to the series, and now I need to go back and read the rest of them. But when you and I first talked, after I read Marauder, I'm like, what you've done here is so unique. And I said, it almost feels like space opera kind of, and you had a way of actually describing the series that you use. Like, how do you, when you tell people about the Oregon Files, what do you say?
Yeah, I really think of it as a combination of Mission Impossible and Star Trek.
Yeah.
Because Mission Impossible, you have the Navy SEALs and CIA agents and doing heists where they're disguising themselves and pulling off all these crazy stunts. But on the other hand, it's like Star Trek, because you have this amazing ship, the Oregon, that gets in all kinds of sea battles, and they're always going on away missions where the captain is leading them and things go wrong and they're communicating with the ship. So in that way, I'm a big Star Trek fan. So I've seen everything in Star Trek, and I just love that structure, and it just fits so well with the Oregon. It's they even have a bridge, where they do some of their action. And so, yeah, it really, I don't mind that it's I think it's a lot like Star Trek in that way.
And it's pure fun. It's pure fun. And one of the things that makes it fun is the way that you insert tech, and that tech is very, very important, both in Marauder and in the series as a whole. And so can you talk a little bit about the role of tech in the series, and then specifically some of the cool things you did in Marauder?
Yeah, so the Oregon is, as I'm sure everybody watching knows, is on the outside, it looks like this tramp steamer that's about to fall apart because it's so rusty and disgusting. But on the inside, it's this super high-tech spy ship with all kinds of weapons and fantastic engines and all kinds of gadgets that they use. And so that was one of the fun aspects of writing these books, is every book coming up with something new to add to the Oregon, and that happens sometimes because I destroyed something in the previous book. So coming up with that tech is, I think, part of the fun of reading this series, is seeing what the new stuff is. And for Marauder, I will, close your ears if you haven't read Final Option, but we sank the Oregon in Final Option. And so that means they need a new ship. And so basically I got to start with a blank sheet of paper and decide what to do. And there are similarities to the previous ship, but we added a bunch of stuff. And I don't want to give it away because it's fun discovering all of the things that the Oregon can do now. But I will say that before Clive died, I sent him, I did a drawing of the ship in my mind's eye, so I could picture it, see exactly how it was designed, where all the stuff, new stuff was, and put up did this drawing about this big. And I emailed it to Clive so he could see it and give me feedback on it. And the last email I ever got from Clive was, it was very short, and it said, "A masterpiece. Go forth and make Marauder a winner." And that was the last email I got from him. So he did, get to approve what the new Oregon was. And he saw the outline for Marauder and was able to read the beginning of the book, but unfortunately I had to finish the book without him, but I think he would be very happy with how it turned out.
And so that's such a cool story, because for those of us that didn't have the pleasure of meeting Clive, it very much illustrates his character and his faith in you and his writers to say, go out and make that happen. But part of the story I find super interesting in that is that he wanted to know down to the detail what the ship looked like and what it did. And so, on one hand, he's got, 4 different series going on at the same time that he's, being the editor for the development editor, the production, the producer or director. And at the same time, he wants to know what the ship looks like and what it can do, down to the level of detail in yours. And so is that pretty typical of Clive, where he was laser focused even on the details like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, he was, especially with the ships in his books, because he was a big fan of ships, and that's why he created Numa, so he could find shipwrecks. I think he found over 50 or 60. I don't know the exact number. And so he didn't mind getting down into the weeds of that at all. He loved it. And he would, one of the things he would do is often send me magazines of, naval research and, showing me all kinds of new technology. And, I would read Wired and Popular Mechanics, and just so I was up on the latest stuff. And so the things that we included in the books, including Marauder, can seem kind of fantastical, but really there's a scientific basis for virtually everything we put in the books with regard to technology. And yes, some of it is stretched to what might be in the future, but that was, one thing Clive always did in his books. The original Dirk Pitt books that he wrote in the 70s, I think actually took place in the 90s, so he could create, brand new technology that wasn't even in use yet. But I think probably everything that he put in those books is now being used on ships. And so, like, for example, there is a, it's pretty early in the book, so I'm not giving too much away, but there's a plasma cannon, and which sounds totally science fictional. Like, no, there's no such things as a plasma cannon. Well, actually, in the 90s at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, they had an experiment called Marauder. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but they put acronyms for everything in the military and the government. So, and it was successful. They created a plasma weapon, and almost immediately after that, it was deemed classified, and we have not heard any more about it. So who knows what it's out there, but the fact that I just saw today that they're putting lasers on fighter jets to shoot down missiles that are being shot at them. And so, it's that kind of thing would have been, you know, in a science fiction book 20 years ago, and now they're actually putting them on F-15s. And so that's kind of what I try to do with the technology, is look forward. What's going to be out there in 10 years or 20 years that's going to be more common, but use them today.
Yeah, and I feel like you being an engineer and a PhD probably, makes you uniquely suited to do that, because I think part of the challenging thing is taking technology that sounds science fiction and making it real in the book, and then explaining it in a way that the reader can instantly grasp what it is and what it does. And you do that very, very well. But as I was reading it, I was imagining you having this notebook full of technology that you've stumbled across that you're looking to put in a book or not. And so is there, over the course of this series of books, what do you have a favorite crazy technological thing that you pulled in, or maybe that you didn't use, but you stumbled across and thought, man, I've got to use this a different time?
Yeah, a lot of the things that I put in the books were there because I had just been reading it, and I said, okay, I've got to use that in a book someday. So I'm going to go back to actually one of my books called The Roswell Conspiracy. And when I worked at NASA, I got to fly in the Vomit Comet, which is the plane used to train astronauts for zero gravity.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it was super cool. I did not throw up. I want that clear. I flew on it 3 times, never threw up. So I was not the one who gave it the name Vomit Comet. But it was such an amazing experience. I was like, and this was long before I even knew I wanted to be a writer, but it stuck with me. And so in Roswell Conspiracy, the climax of the book takes place on a Virgin Galactic type space plane. Nice. That is in zero gravity for 5 minutes, and there is a fist fight in zero gravity on this space plane. Nice. And so I felt uniquely qualified to write that, because I've actually been in zero gravity, and that took 25 years to come to culmination. But yeah, it was fun to finally, and it was a lot of fun writing that scene. So yeah, there's lots of technology that I get to include that I just found and just lock it away. I'm sure you have the same thing, that from all your experience with the FBI and flying helicopters, that you're just itching to use. You did have some helicopter stuff in without sanction, but you haven't really revealed whether that Matt Drake is a pilot or not. I have a feeling someday he's going to you know what, I can really fly helicopters, and then that's going to come in handy. Am I right?
I don't know about that one. I think he does a lot of crazy things, but flying helicopter probably isn't one of them. But I try and put a lot of it's funny. I think, when I look back, I was a huge Tom Clancy fan. That's kind of what brought me to this genre. And I remember being 13 or 14, and my buddy down the street handed me this copy of Red Storm Rising, which, if you've never read it, it is a tome. Like it's 12 or 1300. Yeah, huge. And I started reading it, and I'm like, I'm never going to get through this. And then it sucks you in, because what Tom Clancy did back then is give you what it feels like to sit in an F-14 and do a strafing run on, a Russian cargo ship, or to, Harold Coyle gave you what it felt like to sit in an M1 tank when the Russians rolled through the Fulda Gap. And I feel like that's what I try and do in my books too. And you mentioned the helicopter scenes, I appreciate it, is bring some of that visceral stuff, that the same way that you do with tech, that folks who are techie love that. They love to see, a plasma cannon mounted on a ship, and all of the other stuff I won't give away that you do incredibly well there. And I think people who read military or espionage thrillers want to know what it's like to fly in an F-22 or an F-35 or sit in an Osprey. And so I think we do similar things, in that we try and bring the reader, into the cockpit, or in your case, on the front row seat, to see how that technology works. And I think, it's funny if you look at some of the older Clancy books, some of that stuff probably isn't integral to the plot, but it's fun. And I think that's one of the things, right, I learned as a reader, and it seemed like Clive kind of instilled that into you as well, is there's the plot that drives the story, but there should be fun elements in there that the reader gets just for coming back to that series and just getting the experience. And so do you feel like were there areas where he kind of helped direct you towards that, or were there things that he wanted to see in the book just because it's in the series and he thinks it needs to go in there because that's what the reader's coming back to read in the next book?
Yeah, well, and he's a big student of history, so he always liked to feature historical elements in the book. And I think you're right that people love reading these books because they like learning something, something they hadn't heard of before. So for example, in Final Option, the beginning of the story introduces this submarine called the Bremen from World War I. And there really was a Bremen submarine that was lost in the Atlantic. Nobody knows what happened to it. And it was a submarine. It wasn't just a regular submarine. It was designed to be a cargo submarine because at that time, the British were blockading Germany. And so they were looking for ways to sneak cargo in and out of Germany. And so they built this enormous submarine in World War I. I mean, it's incredible, where I think it could carry 200 tons of cargo. And I never knew that. I just happened to find it. And as soon as I discovered that, I was like, well, I got to put this in a book. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I never knew that. And so, then I had to kind of concoct, well, why is that important today? And what does that have to do with anything? And so I combined it with an actual shipwreck that has never been explained to this day, about a ship in 1921 called the Carroll A. Deering, which ran aground off of Cape Hatteras, and the crew was entirely gone. Nobody knows what happened to them. They just vanished. And this giant 5-masted schooner washed up on shore with no crew aboard. Nobody knows why, what happened, where did the crew go? Were they hijacked? Were there pirates? And so I combined that with the Bremen and came up with an explanation for why. And that's the fun of these books, is when you come across those two things and you go, okay, now how can I put them together?
Guys, can I interrupt for a moment?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to pop back on the screen or not, because I did something I don't know how to undo. And now I don't see me, Patrick. So what do I do here?
I see
a voice.
Yeah.
Well, regardless, there are a couple of things. I'm just going to leap in here for people who are not as tech oriented as the two of you, like me, for example, and ask you about two things. One of which is you did something different in this book, in the sense that you have a villain who's already dead. And since we know that at the very beginning, that is not a spoiler.
No.
So I thought that was a very interesting thing to do, and you could talk about it a bit. But I also wanted you to, because all of Clive's books involve some sort of history, you haven't mentioned what the ancient history is in this book. What was it that you went back to? A battle, in fact, in the Roman era. So you might deal with those really quickly. And then Patrick needs to step in and see if there are any Facebook questions from people watching it.
Yeah, so starting with the second one first. So the Battle of Carrhae is an ancient battle in Syria between the Romans, led by Marcus Licinius Crassus, who people might remember from the movie Spartacus, and against the Parthian Empire, which is now Iran. Parthian Empire became Persian, which became Iran. And it was one of the greatest military defeats of the Roman army. And 10,000 Roman soldiers were taken captive by the Parthians, and they also lost the golden aquila, the golden eagle that was served as the standard for the Roman army. which was considered to be a great disaster. Losing the Aquila is considered the most disgraceful thing that could happen to a Roman legion. But this Roman legion was taken captive, 10,000 soldiers, and nobody knows what happened to them. They don't know if they weren't killed right away. They were taken somewhere. Some people think they were sent out to Western China. Some people think they went other places. And so that's the kind of thing that, nobody knows. So I came up with my own idea about what happened to them. And they went a totally different direction. And when you read the book, you'll see what actually happened to them. And I'm sorry, what was the first question?
It was about the villain in the piece being dead from the very beginning.
Yeah, well, I try not to make it easy on myself. And so I thought, well, what if, I've had all kinds of villains in my stories, but I've never had a dead villain. And I thought, well, can I make a story work with a villain who is already dead and masterminding his plot from the grave? And it was not easy. That was tough to make it. Why would he do that? And what's his plan? And how would he get it accomplished if he's already dead? And so he, like you said, it happens early in the book. His stepdaughter and her husband are both convicted felons. She's a Navy veteran, and he's a former cop and a former detective, and they both were sent to prison for pretty heinous crimes, and they've gotten out. And so this dead guy has left them a message from beyond the grave about what he wants them to do. And if they do it, they're going to inherit his $950 million.
He's a real presence in the book, which I liked a lot. And I also want to give you a big shout out for setting the landscapes of this book, or the seascapes, maybe I should say, because we're in a part of the world we don't read about that often in thrillers. We're over there in Indonesia, and we wind up in Australia. So that was why I picked this silly background that I can no longer see, but maybe you can. I feel like I'm talking out of the void. It's so bizarre. I don't know how to undo myself. I have much to learn about Zoom. Let's let Patrick step in and see if there are any questions now that he'd like to address before we go back to you two.
All right, guys. I do have some questions from the audience. And by the way, Barbara, if you go to the very top right of your screen and hover over it to the little thing that says view, you should be able to bring your self view back.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Okay, so Mark has a number of questions here that are, and one that I really like, and I've actually often wondered this myself. With Clive having numerous series going, is there ever any talk of some of the co-writers just for kind of to mix things up, to kind of swap series for a book?
Well, I've never heard about swapping series. Jack DeBrule has changed series. He used to write the Oregon series before I did. And now he's writing the Isaac Bell series. So there is precedent for that. I've never heard about actually just switching two authors around. There was something that I'm good friends with Graham Brown, who writes the Pneumophile series. We've known each other since before either of us was ever published. And so when I started writing with Clive, he had already written a few books with Clive. And I came up with this idea and said, it might be fun if we write a scene, the same scene, but you put it in one of your Pneumophiles books and write it from Kurt Austin's point of view. And then I'll put it in one of my books and write it from Juan Cabrillo's point of view. And Clive thought that was a great idea. He'd never seen that done before. I don't know if it's ever been done before, but what we did was we came up with a scene that was it had to be written exactly the same events and dialogue in both books. And it was so complex. It took 6 weeks to write, I think, 2 chapters with Graham to make sure everything lined up perfectly. Because Clive said, you've got to do it exact, because if you change dialogue from one book to another, I'm going to get all kinds of letters about it. So you make sure it's exactly the same. And so Graham would write us the scene and send it to me, and I'd say, well, Juan Cabrillo would never say that. And so I'd write it, rewrite it with my stuff and send it back to him, and he'd go, oh, Kurt Austin would never do that. Joe Zavala would do that. And so it took forever to get it, but it was a lot of fun to do. And I'm glad we did it, but I would never, ever do that again. It was so hard to do.
Okay, let's see. Okay, Mark asks, whose idea was it to sink the Oregon?
So this goes to partly why I'm leaving, not why I'm leaving the series, but when I'm leaving the series. So I told Clive before we ever started Final Option that I wanted to leave and go back to writing my solo books. And so at first we thought Final Option would be the last book I would do. And so we were talking about it, and then I remember I was sitting in his office and Clive said, what if we sink the Oregon? And I was like, that is an interesting idea. We could really ramp up the tension with that. And then he and Janet, his wife, were in there, and they kind of looked at each other and they said, well, if you're going to sink the Oregon, you've got to write the next book. You can't just leave it hanging there. I was like, okay, yeah, I agree. I gotta, it will not only be fun to sink the old Oregon, but to then create the new one. And so that's why I stayed on till Marauder, but Marauder will be my last Oregon Files book. And I'm sure the series will continue without me with another author, but I don't know who that will be.
Will you, Mark asks also, will you miss Juan?
Oh yeah,
Cabrillo?
I mean, I'll miss the entire crew. I've introduced new crew members, and created the new ship. And so, yeah, Juan and the entire crew have really, become important to me. And so I really hope it continues on in a fun way. But, and that's why I did add a number, I did create the new ship, but I've left a lot of blank space for whoever's next to put their own stamp on the ship and the series. And, I'll be interested to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it's funny, this time of year, Halloween, just a little bit after Halloween anyway. I don't know, Barbara, did you ever go up to Clive's place this time of year? They always had these elaborate Halloween, decorations out. And I just remember that, each year kind of taking a truckload full of books over there for Clive to sign.
Yeah.
And, and his inner sanctum was so cool, with all those big those models of all the ships. And what an amazing kind of a magical place that he had kind of built for himself there. Not really a question there, but actually, I also have somebody who has a question for Don regarding, kind of entering that Clancy world. And is there a Bible that you have to adhere to, or how much latitude do you have to kind of make it your own, as it were?
So the reason I'm laughing about that is that's a loaded question. So when Tom Colgan offered me the job, if you will, he said, talk to Mark Graney. And so he's like, Mark Graney will tell you everything about it. And so Mike Madden, who was writing before I was, is a phenomenal author. And I talked to Mike a little bit too, but Mark is the only one I think who wrote with Tom. He's written in both series, and then he wrote the first book after Tom died. And so I called Mark up and I'm like, hey, is there a Bible? Is there something like that? And he's like, there's nothing. And he's like, but I will send you what I have. And he's like, I've put this together and I'll mail it to you. And I'm like, oh, this is great. So let me jump off camera just a second. So this is what Mark Greaney sends me. So it is a book that is the Tom Clancy Dead or Alive, and it has all of these Post-it notes on here that in Mark's handwriting say stuff like campus, and you have to flip to it and then see what the campus description is or what it's not. And so from a Bible perspective, there isn't one. Having said that, Mark has been very generous with his time. Mark Cameron, who is writing the Jack Ryan series books, Tom Colgan, our editor, sends me his outline and his books ahead of time. And literally, I was printing off pages and just throwing them in the air. And then I have a 14-year-old daughter who I was paying $10 an hour to take all those pages and turn it into a Bible for me. And so that's the Bible. The second part of how the book works is that you write a synopsis and you get on the phone with Tom Colgan. So much like Clive Cussler, Tom Colgan is kind of the continuity behind all these books, and he knows what's been done and what's not done. And so you spitball ideas with him until he's like, yep, that'll work. And then you write that into a synopsis, and it goes to the Family Foundation and they review it, and then they come back and say, yes, we're good with that. And so for me, it was a pretty easy process, but they have Mark Greaney and Mark Cameron and Mike Madden have built a lot of trust with the Tom Clancy Family Foundation, where they're pretty hands off. They review it and then they just kind of give you the stamp. Mark Greaney told me in the beginning it was a much more, obviously because, it's Tom Clancy's legacy, and they want to be protective of that. And so in the beginning, I think they were much more attentive to it. And now I think Tom Colgan and his writers have built up enough trust that it's not as a laborious of a process. But if somebody else wants $5 an hour and wants to turn that into a Bible, I'm paying people.
Yeah, I did the same thing with Clive's books. I read all the other Oregon books and put little Post-it notes for myself. So that's pretty much seems to be the standard.
Boyd, have you ever made a boo-boo, as it were, and been called out by a fan?
All the time.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, the biggest one I've done is, I'm a certified scuba diver, and I've dived many times, and still, I don't remember which book, I put oxygen tank instead of air tank for the scuba diver. And people are like, no, it's called the air. It's not oxygen, it's air in the tank. And that's right. I don't know what happened. And Clive didn't catch it either. And he's been, he dived for, I think he ordered the first scuba diving equipment ever made by Jacques Cousteau. He had it sent over to him in Hawaii. So, it just happens. I'm going to make mistakes. Don, did you have anything without sanction that somebody called you on? I mean, the stuff even better than I do.
I have some subject matter experts that I show the terrible copies to, and they help do. What I had problems with that, thankfully, the copy editors got for me, and I'm curious if you had to deal with this too, is I'm horrible with timelines for the book, right? Like I just write, and it is where, and maybe the whole book takes 5 minutes because I'm not paying attention. And so like, the first past pages of Without Sanction, I'm like reading the copy editor, and he's like, is it Tuesday? I think it's Tuesday. Yeah. Did this start on Thursday? What day is it now? And I'm like, I have no idea what day it is now.
Yeah. Well, I definitely have to think about that with the Oregon Files books, because the Oregon is a fast ship, but it's still a ship. So it has to be able to get from one place to another. And I can't just, snap my fingers and have it in another part of the world. So that's one reason we had to choose every time for every book. This one's in Indonesia and Australia, and the last book was South America. And so, you can't have it go from South America to Australia unless your book takes place over a month. And so I really had to, but the timing stuff, I always mess up too.
That's a really good point, Boyd. And I think one of the things that's so outstanding about Marauder is the pacing. I mean, it is just like a rocket ride. And I found myself I never do this. I found myself really flipping pages and going, no, as we're moving along. I thought you did a brilliant job with the pace. And just to let you know, I looked up Marauder while you were talking, so I can tell you what the acronym is. Are you ready?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. It's magnetically accelerated ring to achieve ultra high directed energy and radiation.
That sounds like like science fiction, but it's not. It's amazing what you can find out there that you don't have to make up. I mean, I made up so little in this book, and most people will go, well, that's just bull. That couldn't happen.
Listen, I've told you this before, but when I was a child, I lived across this, or my grandparents had a house across the street from the man who drew the Dick Tracy comic strips. And so, while they were doing two-way wristwatches and all that kind of stuff, which is so far in the future, nobody could imagine it. We were
Right.
little kids sitting there going, boy, is that cool? We thought it was surely going to happen. So, I think there have always been creative types that have thought ahead to possibilities based on science or maybe just on hope, and have achieved remarkable things. I mean, huge amount of science fiction has all come true.
Yeah, look at the Star Trek.
Surprising amount, or even comic strips. So Patrick, is there anything else that we want to wind up with?
Well, there's a question here. You actually might know the answer to this better than anybody else, which is which of the other Clive Cussler series will be continuing? I know Dirk Pitt will be.
Well, I can tell you from at the moment that Graham will have a book out in early March, and that will be a pneuma file, right? And then Jack's book is coming out in May, and that will be an Isaac Bell. And in August, this is all 2021, Dirk will have a new Dirk Pitt out. And beyond that, I don't really know. Dirk has, with or without Tom, I'm not sure who the person at the publishing house is, but Dirk is assuming Clive's role as the producer, if you will, to make it all work. And I honestly don't know who will replace Boyd at this point. I don't know if Robin is writing another book.
She is.
Oh, good. Okay, well then Robin would be up presumably then after Dirk. So probably she would be November. But the books take a long time to write, and they may take longer without Clive. It may require more effort on the part of the co-authors, because all of them so far have worked with Clive. And the books that have come out to this point, Graham's may be the last one, and Jack. I think that Clive participated certainly with Jack, although Jack went back to revise, and I think with Graham. So probably Robin then would be, or Dirk would be the first one up that, and series have to develop. I mean, no matter how faithful you want to be to the original, time goes on, and, the world changes. And we see that with the Spencer franchise that, Ace Atkins has done, and now Mike Lupica took over from Reed Farrell Coleman. And, everybody has to make it his or her own, in addition to being faithful to the progenitor. And I think that that's an interesting thing to do. So, Don, you will find out as you work along, because I think Mike did an outstanding job with the Jack Ryan Jr. books, and definitely took them in new directions with new technology. So
yeah, and I think that's why James Bond has been around for 60 years, is because every new generation puts a new spin on it, but the character himself is what people are coming to see or read about.
Well, that's absolutely true. Look at Daniel Craig's James Bond in the movies. I mean, broke my heart to lose Sean Connery recently, but Sean Connery's James Bond and the new guy are wildly different. Is that it, Patrick?
That's just about it. Yeah.
All right.
I was going to go ahead and hold up, one of the remaining copies of the book we have, and
autographed by Boyd, you might happen to mention.
Not to sound like a used car salesman, but they are going fast. We have some left here, though.
So Don, did you have any wind up question? Because I know that we trot in there and you might possibly have something else you wanted to ask.
Just two left. I want to know what Boyd is working on next. And then maybe for the final one, you three have all known Clive. I've only known him through his books, and that's probably most of the readers. I guess Boyd and maybe Patrick and Barbara too. If you would say one thing about Clive, what would that be to describe him as a man? So maybe start with you, Boyd.
Well, I'll start with what I'm working on next. I'm actually working on a book with my sister. She is the head curator of medieval manuscripts at the Getty Museum, and we are writing a historical adventure together that takes place in the Middle Ages. And don't know what's going to happen with that, when it's going to come out, but we're having a lot of fun with it. And the way I think of it as having the same pacing and action as any Clive novel I've done. And as you know, Clive almost always had a historical prologue in his books. And so the way I think of it is, our book is just one of those prologues, but for the whole story. And we're having a great time with it. And, you know, my sister is the ringer, because she knows all this detail. She's probably one of the foremost experts in the world about the Middle Ages. So I can just depend on her for all that detail. And then Clive, he was family to me. It was really hard to lose him.
Patrick, what would you say?
One word, mischievous.
What would I say? I can't do it in one word. He had
That's
a
tough.
fabulous work ethic. He really stayed true to himself. You know, Clive wasn't perfect. I mean, I don't want to make him sound like he was, you know, he wasn't. He had flaws, and yet he had superb qualities. I knew him for 30 years and was never once angry with him or disappointed with him. I hope it worked in reverse. I'm not really sure. And, you know, he really was. Patrick, you're right, mischievous. He loved showing up in one of his cars at the store. You know, he was a joker. And he had a tremendous sense of adventure. His actual life was full of the kinds of things that are in the books. We did an 80th birthday party for him at the Arizona Biltmore, and the family brought out all kinds of photos. I've given each of them, in fact, you know, little memory stick with all of the photos on it. And if you go through it, you can see Clive doing all these dirt pit things. You know, he would going out in ships, flying in airplanes, going underwater, you know, leaping off tall cliffs, single bounding. I mean, he really was. He was a big man. He was big, you know. And Boyd, you're tall, but are you taller than Clive, or are you about the same?
Yeah, yeah. And but he was, you know, he was just as larger than life as the characters in his books. I mean, he wrote his life pretty much.
Yeah.
You know, he collected cars, he dived on shipwrecks, he, you know, knew weapons really well. And, you know, he just included all, he lived life like he was a great example for me. And, you know, he included everything in his books that he loved in his life. And so he just enjoyed it all. And you know, I was really touched that Final Option was the last book he ever signed with me. And, you know, and so I'm really glad I got to come down last year and do that signing in person with him, because that's just such a great memory.
Well, we were glad too. And I'm glad we have photos of it. And I'm glad we could do it in the car collection here. It's Janet's car collection. Clive's is still up in Colorado. But yes, I mean, and, you know, honestly, I have to tell you, I mean, you know, he lived to be 89. And for the last 2 or 3 years that he was alive, I approached every single thing we did with him as potentially the last one, because, you know, the older you get, the more fragile you are. And, you know, we try to always bring the same energy to it and the same caring and the same excitement, because we never knew whether it would be the last one. We kept him a long time, and I'm grateful for every single year of it. I really am. Gentlemen, thank you. It's been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Patrick, thank you for all the great tech, and thank you, all of you in the audience who are watching us tonight. There'll be a podcast in case you missed anything that you can listen to, and this video will stay live on Facebook and eventually will be on YouTube as well. So please tell your friends that they can enjoy it even if they weren't with us this evening. Happy holidays, guys. Good night.
Good. See you.